Quick question, which of these numbers is correct? 0, 32, 273.15, or 491.67? Believe it or not, they're all exactly the same temperature, the point where water freezes. So, who messed this up? Why would humanity invent four different ways to measure the exact same thing? Why does water freeze at 0 degrees Celsius but 32 degrees Fahrenheit? Why does physics insist it's actually 273.15 Kelvin? And why is there a temperature scale you've probably never even heard of that says the answer is 491.67 degrees Rankine? It sounds completely absurd, and honestly, it kind of is, until you know why. Before thermometers, people didn't really measure temperature, they described it: cold, warm, hot. If you asked someone how warm it was outside, they'd give you an opinion, not a number. But during the 17th and 18th centuries, science was changing. Scientists wanted experiments that anyone could repeat. That meant they needed a way to measure temperature precisely. The problem was, heat is invisible. You can't hold it. You can't weigh it. So how do you create a scale for something you can't see? You need reference points, temperatures that can always be reproduced. Today, using water seems obvious. Water freezes, water boils, problem solved. Except nobody had agreed on that yet. One of the first people to tackle this problem was Daniel Gabriel Fahrenheit. Today, his temperature scale is often treated like the weird one, especially outside the United States. But in the early 1700s, it was actually an impressive piece of engineering. Fahrenheit wanted fixed temperatures that could be recreated reliably. One of his reference points was a mixture of ice, water, and salt. It produced one of the coldest stable temperatures people could easily make at the time. He used that as 0. Another reference point was approximately human body temperature. Originally, that was around 96 degrees. Years later, as his scale became standardized using the freezing and boiling points of pure water, that same body temperature ended up measuring around 98.6 degrees Fahrenheit. Not because our bodies got warmer, but because the scale itself became more precisely defined. Eventually, water froze at exactly 32 degrees and boiled at exactly 212. At first glance, those numbers look completely random. Why 32? Why 212? Interestingly, there are exactly 180 degrees between them. Was that intentional? Historians aren't entirely sure. It may simply have been a consequence of how Fahrenheit originally built his scale and how it was later standardized. But whether by design or by accident, the result turned out to be remarkably useful. 180 divides cleanly into halves, thirds, quarters, sixths, and many other fractions. Long before calculators, that made precise measurements surprisingly convenient. The numbers weren't chosen because they looked nice. They worked. Then came Anders Celsius. His solution seems almost embarrassingly simple. Use water, make freezing 0, make boiling 100. Done. Except that's not what he actually proposed. Celsius's original scale ran backwards. Water boiled at 0 degrees. Water froze at 100. Only after his death did other scientists reverse the scale into the version we use today. So the temperature scale that now feels perfectly logical actually started upside down. Sometimes history has a strange sense of humor. Then physics changed the question entirely. Scientists realized temperature wasn't just a human invention. Nature itself has a limit. No matter how advanced your freezer becomes, no matter what technology you invent, there is a point beyond which matter simply cannot become any colder. That limit is called absolute zero, not because it's extremely cold, but because physics says nothing can have less thermal energy than that. This became the foundation of the Kelvin scale. Instead of choosing a convenient reference like freezing water, Kelvin begins where the universe itself says temperature starts. Absolute zero is 0 Kelvin. Water freezes at 273.15 Kelvin. It boils at 373.15. Scientists love Kelvin because it removes an unnecessary complication. There are no negative temperatures when you're measuring thermal energy. Everything starts from zero. It's elegant, it's logical, and it's one of the reasons every serious scientific calculation uses Kelvin instead of Celsius. But just when you think the story's over, someone invented another scale. Meet Rankine. Almost nobody has heard of it. Imagine someone asked, what if Kelvin, but in Fahrenheit? That's essentially what Rankine is. Like Kelvin, it begins at absolute zero, but instead of using Celsius-sized degrees, it keeps Fahrenheit-sized ones. Water freezes at 491.67 degrees Rankine. It boils at 671.67. It sounds completely unnecessary until you're an engineer. For decades, many industries, especially in the United States, designed power plants, steam turbines, and aircraft engines using Fahrenheit. When engineers needed absolute temperatures for thermodynamic calculations, constantly converting between Fahrenheit and Kelvin was inconvenient, so instead they simply moved Fahrenheit's zero point down to absolute zero. The result was Rankine. It wasn't created because anyone wanted another temperature scale. It was created because it solved a very specific engineering problem, and that's really the story of every temperature scale. At first glance, they look like humanity couldn't agree on basic math. One says water freezes at zero, another says 32, another says 273, another says almost 500. It feels chaotic, it feels irrational, it feels absurd, but each scale was answering a different question. Fahrenheit answered the needs of early instrument makers. Celsius answered the need for simplicity. Kelvin answered the needs of physics. Rankine answered the needs of engineers working in Fahrenheit. None of them are wrong. They're solutions to different problems. And that's what makes history so fascinating. We usually inherit the answers without ever seeing the questions that created them. The world is full of systems that seem ridiculous until you discover the problem they were originally designed to solve. Because history rarely gives us perfect solutions, it gives us useful ones. And sometimes those useful solutions become traditions, even when they look completely absurd. If you've ever looked at something and wondered, who on earth designed it this way? You're asking exactly the right question, because that's where the best stories begin. Welcome to the Real Absurdities. Nothing makes sense until it does.